Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, here on my Justice Matters YouTube channel, as you may know, I try to post a legal analysis video every day. Try to unravel and translate from legalese to English, whatever the breaking legal news is on our legal landscape, or what I sometimes refer to as our legal hellscape. And as you well know, a lot of these issues can be challenging, can be depressing, anxiety-producing even. Of course, some of them are uplifting as we hopefully head in the direction of accountability and justice. But what I've decided to do is try to lighten things up from time to time. So I'm going to do a recurring series or segment that we're going to call The Lighter Side of Legal. Here's what it's going to look like. I'm going to interview my fellow TV legal analysts, folks who have decided to sort of take on the work of explaining to the viewing public the legal issues of the day. And when I sit down and chat with my fellow legal analysts, we're not going to talk about the legal issues of the day. It's going to be a much lighter conversation. We're going to talk about what it is that drew us to, the work of being a TV legal analyst or a YouTube legal analyst or having a podcast or a SiriusXM radio show discussing legal issues of the day. We'll talk about sort of who our inspirations are, who our mentors are. We'll talk about light subjects like what's our favorite movie involving the law, or, well, mine happens to be A Few Good Men. And then I'll talk about other things that are of interest to me and hopefully to you. I'm a music junkie, so I'm always interested in hearing, what folks' favorite bands are, what their favorite albums are, what their favorite concerts are. So it's going to be the lighter side of legal. And this is episode 1. And I asked my friend and fellow TV legal analyst, Danny Cevallos, to be my guinea pig, to join me for the maiden legal voyage of the lighter side of legal. I so enjoy and respect Danny's legal analysis and commentary. He and I have both been on MSNBC now as legal analysts for 7 or 8 years. And what I love about Danny is he comes from a very different perspective and background than I come from. He was and is a career defense attorney, and I was a career prosecutor before retiring from the Department of Justice. So we often come at issues from two very different places, different backgrounds, different perspectives. Interestingly, we often, though not always, kind of land at the same place when we're discussing a legal issue that happens to be in the news on any given day. So, I've known Danny for years. I first met him up at 30 Rockefeller Center in New York City when we used to be on air together, on set together, on a show that is no longer in existence called Up with David Gura. There's a picture of us. We would all sit around this round table for the entire show, not just a 5-minute segment, and talk about all of the issues of the day, not just the legal issues. Part of the fun of being a regular on Up with David Gura was they always had a big plate of pastries in the middle of the table, and one of our challenges was to pick up a donut or a pastry and take a bite while we were on air giving our commentary. And if we were brave enough to do that, though we might look a little foolish doing it, we were then declared to be pastriots. There was this sort of whole following around that show and around the pastry plate. The pastry plate had its own Twitter account, believe it or not. So I was really excited to have Danny join me as my first guest on the lighter side of legal. Here's episode 1, and I would love your feedback. You can always email me at my website, glennkirshner.com, and shoot me a message. Let me know if this is something that you enjoyed, something that you'd like to see as a recurring series, and what legal analysts would you like me to interview, because there are a lot of us out there, and I'm looking forward to sitting down with many of them and talking about the lighter side of legal. We're going to call this the lighter side of legal. I don't know that attorneys and legal analysts are known as a particularly fun bunch, of course, present company accepted. But you hear from us on MSNBC. Both Danny and I are legal analysts, and we have been there for 7 or 8 years. And I think I can speak for him. We love what we do. We love having a voice on sort of the legal issues of the day, because they are not easy to understand, particularly when people are always throwing disinformation in the mix for sometimes nefarious reasons. We don't get to spend much time talking about the lighter side of legal and what it is that brought us to become legal analysts. So, Danny, I can't tell you how thrilled I am that, you are going to be the first guest on the lighter side of legal.
I really am just touched that you would ask me on for this sort of inaugural episode. And I will take issue with one thing, your suggestion that people may not think of legal analysts as fun. One immutable fact in my career, Glenn Kirshner, that the most fun people at the happy hour are always the prosecutors. They may not show it in the courtroom. They may not show that side of them very often, but prosecutors have a fun streak in them.
That's funny, and for 30 years as a trial prosecutor, I never did leave the courtroom. That was my first love, was trying cases. And I almost always had a co-chair, because goodness knows I'm not going to try a case by myself if I can help it. And one of the things I always told to my co-chair or my second chair was, this may not be your first inclination, but we're going to have fun trying this case. And even though the stakes were often very high, I think we always managed to have a good bit of fun in the work that we did. Let me talk a little bit about your career as a defense attorney. And the first question is, do you have a favorite case that you handled in your many years as a very accomplished defense attorney?
Yeah, I practice actually in the U.S. Virgin Islands in addition to New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And some of my most exciting cases have come from there. My cases here stateside feel much less dramatic and interesting than the ones that I end up taking down there in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's a major importation point for drugs. There's a lot of violence, a lot of homicides. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, you may know, probably drags the national homicide per capita rate up pretty significantly. It's not a huge statistical location, but it's not a great place for homicide, the U.S. Virgin Islands. One of my earliest trials was a drug case in which my client was accused of sitting in a speedboat in the middle of the Caribbean waiting for a plane to drop 300 kilos of cocaine. The catch was there was no cocaine. It was all a sting. I've somehow ended up with all these sting cases. There was no actual drugs. He never actually picked up the drugs. And they swooped in. They've got the grainy night vision from the circling plane overhead, picked up my guy. And it was a fascinating education. The law of attempt and the idea that he believed he was picking up 300 kilos of cocaine being sufficient to prosecute him for picking up that cocaine, even though it never existed. It was duct tape telephone books that he never saw. But it really was an education for me on the sort of the idea of attempt, of inchoate crimes, and it was very early in my career. And it was actually a CJA case. I was on the CJA panel. Now, for folks listening, the CJA panel in the federal system is where the government, if there's a conflict, they'll appoint private attorneys for, well, let's just say not a king's ransom, but they'll pay them to handle these cases. That was one of my early CJA cases, and I had to fly down there for trial. It was really a tremendous experience. I think because it was one of my early trials in front of a judge that is very tough, very fair, no longer on the bench, Judge Curtis Gomez. The guy ran a courtroom with just deadly efficiency, did not suffer fools, and many times I was a fool in front of his honor. But, a good judge to try a case in front of. And that's probably the one I remember the most because it was one of my early cases.
So the viewers are going to want to know, did you win?
Oh, no, I did not. No, because and that's why you'll hear me often say on air that, and I think maybe other defense attorneys think this. I think I sometimes lack their bravado. But I often say on air, federal court is the most depressing place to be. You don't win. I got to tell you, I just had a federal trial in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania last year. I beat 20 out of the 24 counts, and I considered that like I'd won the New York Marathon. Like that was, and someone might say, yeah, but your guy still got convicted. I'm like, yeah, but 20 out of 24 counts in federal court. To me, it was a huge victory. Now, for the Mark Garagoses of the world and the Chuck Perutos and all the other, marquee criminal defense attorneys, they've probably beaten a lot of federal cases. I have not. Federal court is a tough place to be. But here's the thing, Glenn. When I finish a federal trial, I feel like I've learned a ton. because if you can try cases in federal court, you can try cases anywhere. And that's why, by the way, if I can toot the Glenn Kirshner horn for a minute, I mean, a lot of folks may not know this about you, but you operated in a very, very specific, unique, and rare environment. You were probably on trial pretty much nonstop, handling the kinds of cases you did in DC, whereas most federal prosecutors are simply not on trial with the same frequency as you are. Because of the nature of what you were doing, handling homicides, handling cases in D.C. You had the kind of experience that I think federal prosecutors and people like me dream of. I mean, how exciting. I mean, you must have, I imagine you were probably on trial for weeks and months at a time. Am I right?
Yeah, so it's kind of you to say that. First, let me say sting cases, when the whole thing is a setup and there are no drugs involved, that's where I think jury nullification looms large, at least the potential for it, because juries don't always like those kinds of cases. Because of our unique jurisdiction in DC, I would be trying RICO cases in federal court for literally, 6 months at a time. Wow. And then the next year I would walk across the street to the Superior Court for the District of Columbia, which is where my heart always was. That's where we are the local prosecutors for the District of Columbia, just like local prosecutors in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Chicago, Detroit, you name it. And I think my busiest year, I tried 9 murder cases in Superior Court, and I tried more than 50 murder cases in my time there. So I was back and forth between the two courthouses, and it is the single most vibrant and rewarding prosecutorial practice anywhere in the country. So thank you for bringing that up. But this is going to be a little inside baseball maybe, but let me throw 2 names out to you because you did a case in the Virgin Islands. 2 of my former homicide prosecutors. One was Ronald Sharp and the other was George Pace. Do either of those 2 names ring a bell?
Yes, of course, Ron Sharp. Yes, of course. Everyone knows who Ron Sharp is. Yeah, and George Pace, I've seen his name.
Yeah, U.S. attorney down in the Virgin Islands, was a homicide prosecutor in my shop for years and a really, really strong trial court prosecutor, then went on to bigger and better things while some of us just kind of toil in anonymity for the rest of our career. Let me now go to another lighter side of legal question. Do you have any significant mentors or inspirations in the legal world, during the course of your career that you would point to?
So I am a true mimic. I mean, I always look for people I can sort of grab pieces of style from, of information. I started out, I wasn't in a criminal defense practice. I did it all by myself, which was the most, I go back to my first few years, and honestly, I may have blotted them all out because it was so terrifying. Lawyers often talk about how valuable it is to have an office where you can walk down the hall and bounce ideas off someone. And for many years, I didn't have that. I still don't to a large degree. So I would always watch people in the courtroom. And I became, in my view, kind of an anthropologist of the different kinds of lawyers in the courtroom. What I love about the practice of criminal defense and prosecution and criminal justice is that whether you're in the U.S. Virgin Islands or in Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, you have the same characters. They're all the same. And, there are a couple different kinds of criminal defense attorneys. And I'm fascinated because they couldn't be more different, but they often get good results. There's the kind of bookworm, the one who has every statute memorized. They've looked at every stitch of evidence. It's who I aspire to be. I want to have that command of the file, and it eludes me. But then you have the guy with the chalk striped suits, the two-tone shirt, the great hair. He comes in, you get the feeling he hasn't even looked at the file. He gets up there, he tells a razzle-dazzle story, and the jury is eating out of his hand, and you're left thinking, how did he just do that? And then, then you have the character, the courthouse denizen, the guy who takes only court-appointed cases, never gets hired by anyone, shuffling around. His suit's 40 years old, and he's got 5,000 cases on his list. And he's always making some crazy argument about the Third Amendment or something else. And I mean, those characters, they're everywhere, Glenn, and they're all the same. And so I've sort of watched everybody and borrowed from them. I am such a mimic. Glenn Kirshner is someone I watch. Your cadence, I listen to that. I borrow from everybody, and I go off and try it in a trial myself. I watch your cadence. I try to learn from the way you phrase things. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours, and I'm not just pandering here, because I know you're a frequent guest on Dean Obeidallah's show, and there's nothing I do but criticize Dean Obeidallah. So it's certainly not because you're the host of the show. But I'm a big Glenn Kirshner fan, and part of this amazing job of doing television legal analysis is you get to rub shoulders with some pretty amazing attorneys. And you can look to them for inspiration. And the great thing is now part of our job, we get to read so many briefs and filings by really talented people and watch in at least courtrooms where cameras are allowed, watch some of the very best do the work and sometimes some of the very worst. And you learn from them. And honestly, you can learn a lot from watching some of the worst people. I mean, I'm sure, again, being in court as much as you were waiting for cases and you see some complete shenanigans and you learn from that. You learn, I'm not going to do that. That's not a good idea. I'll pick one person. I've always been a huge fan of Vincent Bugliosi. He writes these amazing books about prosecution and even being a defense attorney. And he passed probably, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. Brilliant attorney, but when you read he's certainly not someone I can emulate, because if you ever read Vincent Bugliosi, he prosecuted the Manson trials. He was a legend. He wrote a book about OJ. But when you hear about what he would do in court, the way he would talk to judges, he was so confident, bordering on arrogant. So here's a guy I admire greatly because he preached ultimate command of the file. He preached the yellow notepad, writing everything on notes. I admire all that. I would never do what he did because he would talk to judges in a way that I think would have me thrown in jail immediately. But somebody I looked up to, somebody whose books I love, somebody who I think you can learn a lot from, but I ain't going to go walk into a courtroom and behave like Vincent Bugliosi. That's for sure.
Yeah, I read his book, The Case for Prosecuting George W. Bush. That was an interesting take on that part of American history. Okay, how about your favorite movie involving the law in some way or another? Do you have one?
You know, I'm a child of sort of the 80s and 90s, so I think I categorize these as before I became a lawyer and after I became a lawyer. I guess we all saw A Few Good Men. Post-lawyer, there is a novelist who writes books who have been made into TV shows and a movie, the movie being The Lincoln Lawyer, the series being a series called Bosch. The movies are fine. The series is fine. Lincoln Lawyer, not so much on that. The books are fantastic because I look for the books or the narrative about what it's really like to be a criminal defense attorney. I think so many movies get it wrong where they show some handsome guy in a three-piece suit come in and his day appears to be sports cars and just razzle-dazzle in the courtroom. I love when they show the grind. And, Better Call Saul is a good example. They show a lot of the grind in there, just schlepping from courtroom to courtroom, getting your voucher signed, sitting in jail, waiting to meet with your client in a detention center. That is the grind. The 1% of when you're actually in court and it's fun. There's so many other things that go into it. So I love anything that shows the grind, not only of being a lawyer, being a prosecutor, or even being a police officer. Anything that, if you watch the TV shows that show cops, walking away from explosions slowly in silhouette, those are great. They're fun. I love the grind. I love when they show when an author gets it right about what it's really like to sweat it out in a courthouse when you have 11 cases on and you're running from room to room and the judge is yelling at you and the sheriff's deputy won't bring your darn client up from the basement. What's so hard about getting the guy up from the basement, people? So, yes, I'm a big fan of Michael Connelly's books and his movie, The Lincoln Lawyer. Love that movie. A little Hollywood dramatized, but the books are fantastic.
Danny, we have some of the same tastes and sensibilities. Frankly, my favorite law-related movie probably is A Few Good Men, directed by Rob Reiner. And probably my favorite fiction writer is Michael Connelly. I've got every Connelly book right behind me. I've got the anthologies. I started with The Poet and I never stopped. He is an amazing crime fiction author. Just amazing. So what a coincidence. Okay, now this is kind of a personal privilege that I take because I'm a music junkie. All right, a couple nights ago I went to the ELO, the Jeff Lynne ELO concert. I go to every Bruce Springsteen concert within 100 miles. I grew up on rock and roll and R&B and Motown, and I am a music junkie. If you had to pick one or two or three favorite albums, favorite bands, who would you go to?
Okay, Glenn, I want your mercy because I know folks who love the music that you love. Remember, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I'm in that window of music that you're going to find offensive, corny, 80s out, and so forgive me in advance, but I am a creature of, let's say 1987 MTV, which is pretty much what I watched for 8 hours a day back then. But hear me out. My three top favorite albums are Pink Floyd, The Wall has to be number one. But again, a lot of this is your experience when you first hear it. At the time, when I in 1988 or 89, I was sent to military school because I was a poorly behaved kid. And the one thing they allowed us to earn if we were good was a CD player and headphones. And every Friday night, I would shine my shoes and listen to The Wall back and forth. I knew nothing about drugs or drug culture or really any of the things they were talking about. I just loved that album. Then after that, you may or may not agree with me. I am going to predict that the band I'm going to name next, you are going to like the earlier era. I like the later era again because I'm a child of the 80s. But Van Halen's album 5150 during the Sammy Hagar era is, in my view, one of the best albums, pound for pound. There's every song on there, in my view, is at least a triple. It's great, but again, it could be a product of where I'm from. You'd be hard-pressed to find people who are Van Halen fans of the Sammy Hagar era. Everyone else loves David Lee Roth. I get it. I like that stuff too. And then finally, I'm kind of off the beaten path, and now I'm going to get very honest. I'm actually pretty lame. The two bands I just named are pretty rocking out compared to where my tastes really lie. I'm a huge Billy Joel fan, massive Billy Joel fan. He came out with a concert album in Russia in, I believe, 87 or 86, called the Russian word for concert, which I can't possibly pronounce. It's a great album. It's every one of his songs that I love. I'm a hack piano player. I try all the time watching YouTube to learn anything that he plays. Huge Billy Joel fan. I know it's not hard rock. I know it's not crazy, but I've loved him all my life. I love the sort of angst of the growing up and sort of this idea that if you get to New York someday, you know, the romantic kind of pain and love of New York and New York City, which I live in, and I feel that now. And so it was a huge part of my life growing up. Love Billy Joel, and those would probably be my top three albums if I had to pick.
I'm in a New York state of mind.
Love it.
First of all, you scared me with your preamble and your caveats and your qualifications in the run-up to answering that question. I was waiting to hear Wham and the Bay City Rollers, but what you gave us... I love Pink Floyd, and I saw Roger Waters on his last tour in DC. It was mind-blowing. I love Van Halen. I love Billy Joel. I mean, look, I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in Jersey. How can you not love Billy Joel? So, I mean, those are three, great picks from, in my humble opinion. Okay, just two more questions. So the first is, we've both been legal analysts on MSNBC, and I am honored to have even a tiny little voice in discussing the legal issues of the day. And I don't want to speak for you, but I suspect you feel the same way. We've been doing it for 7 or 8 years. What's your favorite part about being a TV legal analyst, and what's your least favorite part? And then I have one wrap-up question.
Here's what I fell in love with. And it wasn't the idea when I first did TV. Trust me when I tell you, the first time I got on TV in a very local network that no longer exists in Philadelphia called CN8. Nobody was looking for Danny Cevallos. Nobody said, who's the marquee name in criminal defense in Philadelphia? I'm not the top 10 marquee names in Philly. I'm probably not the top 50. But for me, I had given a friend a ride who was a big shot criminal defense lawyer and saw the green room, saw the makeup room, saw the lights, saw the camera, and I didn't care if anyone ever saw it. And frankly, at this network, I don't know if anyone ever did see it. But for me, the challenge of possibly making a complete idiot of myself, the test of sort of you have 90 seconds to come up with something clever, and the challenge of communicating complex issues in a short period of time, all of those things I fell in love with. And I realized it's not that different from trial work, except that the hit, if you compare it to a drug, you don't have to do all the work of trial prep. It is such an adrenaline shot. It's why I fell in love with TV. And from there, I just relentlessly pitched myself. Glenn, I promise you, no one was ever looking for Danny Cevallos. But once they let me come on set, I pitched, I sent emails, I sent story ideas. I still do that to this day. And I work at NBC, I'm employed there. I have a contract. So, I don't, presumably I don't need to do that, but I love it. That's what I fell in love with. If I could say there's one thing I don't like about it, it can be really terrifying setting any kind of schedule. particularly my court schedule or depositions or things like that. That's the part that gives me real agita, because the worst thing that could happen is you schedule an all-day deposition on a day that Trump gets indicted, and you miss out on being able to be on TV. That can be kind of terrifying. But in terms of being on TV, really, it's something I fell in love with. I found what I loved doing in my mid-30s in Philadelphia at a small network, and somehow miraculously, I ended up at NBC, the network I grew up on, the Peacock, the must-see TV. So the idea that I even get to come to 30 Rock every day is bananas to me. It's still bananas. I can't believe it. I always say, it really is the American dream. This country is amazing that someone who's a complete unknown, if you love something enough, you can end up in it with a career in it just through that pure passion, not through strategy or who I knew or anything like that. It's kind of a miracle to me, and I just love it. I love everything about it. It's fun. I think there's some anxiety. I think you may have mentioned that earlier about what this job's going to be in 5 or 10 years. And I do wonder about that. But, look, if it all ended tomorrow, I feel like the luckiest guy on the face of the earth.
No, so Danny, we may be brothers from another mother, because I have been saying since the minute MSNBC signed me, who would have thought a gutter kid from Jersey would get to run his mouth on TV? I still marvel at it every day. Quickly, what about your least favorite? If you had to encapsulate, what's your least favorite part of being a legal analyst?
The fear of scheduling something when news breaks, that's always terrifying. And, look, I've done some real yoga stretching moves to make everything work when I have to, including, I may or may not have taken breaks from depositions to go out and do a hit and come back in. I won't admit that. I won't confirm it. I won't deny it. But that's the part that can be terrifying. And then, of course, I think the biggest thing is the fear of saying something galactically stupid on air, which I've done several times. The reaction is often swift. Part of what makes this job exciting is that the possibility that you might say one or two words that could get you in huge trouble, and it's like walking a tightrope. So that's why you have to think very carefully about your words, think very carefully about what you're saying, and I love that challenge. But also, because it's a challenge, it means there are consequences if it goes awry, and sometimes it does. Even as hard as I may try, sometimes I screw up, and that feeling. It can be pretty scary to be in front of tens of thousands of people and say something really, really dumb.
Do I ever know the feeling of screwing up on TV, my friend?
Oh, boy.
Okay, last question, and it's kind of a two-parter. If you were not a lawyer, what would you want to be doing for a profession, and what would you be doing? Because I would want to be a center on a professional football team, but that's not realistic.
Sure.
So what do you think you'd be doing? And your dream job, what would you be doing?
I've loved stand-up comedy since I was a young kid. I'd like to believe that if I hadn't gone to law school, I would have just set out for the West Coast and done open mics until I made it. More likely, even if I'd done that, I'd probably just be like a road hack, at the Best Western for 3 nights in, Poughkeepsie or in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I've often thought about that. I love comedy, even if even maybe as a comedy writer on a show. I don't know that I'm particularly that funny. I just love I find stand-up comedy and comedy really fascinating. I'm a big consumer of it. Maybe that's what I would have done. But honestly, what I would actually be doing, man, if I hadn't gone to law school, Glenn, I was kind of aimless. I was not in college voted most likely to kill it. I was, I think a lot of my friends in college were wondering like, hey, what's Cevallos going to do? But I found law school. I got there. It was scary. I had doubts about it, but I ended up loving it. But even after law school, it took me a few years to find that I wanted to open my own practice. And I started out some big law firms, some medium-sized law firms, but it took me a while to find what I wanted to do. And if I hadn't gone to law school, I really don't know. I actually was in Navy ROTC for a few years, but I got kicked out because I am colorblind. And at the time, you needed to pass a colorblind test to go surface warfare. But I will add, because it's part of the story, they said, well, we have to let you go, or you could go Marine option. And I said, thank you very much. I'm all set. I don't think I could hack it. I don't think I could survive the Marine option. But yeah, that was maybe, I wanted to be in the Navy, couldn't be in the Navy. So I don't know, Glenn. I don't know what I would have done. I guess I got pretty lucky.
That's definitely an offer that you can refuse. How about the Marine Corps? I was an Army guy, so the Marines make fun of me, but still. All right, Danny, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation, how much I appreciate you being part of, our first episode of the lighter side of law. And I hope you'll come back and we'll do part 2 and maybe part 3. And I know I will see you on TV, and hopefully I'll be together with you on panel sometime soon, the way we always used to be when, for example, David Gura had his wonderful Up with David Gura show on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and we would be at that round table together for the whole show, eating our donuts and our pastries, and I miss those days, and I miss spending that time with you. But thanks for joining us here today on Justice Matters, Danny Cevallos.
Glenn, thank you so much. You could have had so many better guests, and you had me, and I could not be more honored. Thank you. Thank you. To paraphrase Joe DiMaggio. Not Joe DiMaggio, whatever. Who was that in baseball? I screwed up my quote. Sorry, Glenn.
Was it Babe Ruth? I don't remember.
No, the guy who gave the speech. Lou Gehrig. I'm sorry, sports fans
right.
out there. I apologize. On the recusal issue, I think I'm in the minority because I don't necessarily think there's enough yet for Diane Cannon to be. Did I just do that? I've been doing that.
Diane Cannon, a fine actress, by the way.
Oh, my
I think
God.
she'd make a better judge than Aileen Cannon. But
all
maybe
right.
that's just me. Go ahead, Danny.
I'm all frazzled after getting kicked off. Okay. All right. Let me try it again.